Thunder, flashing lights, a trembling dog on a cold metal table. That's how it began. Rex wasn't just any dog. She was a hero. A German shepherd who had once served beside officers, who'd saved her owner's life from fire and loss. But that night, as lightning tore across the Texas sky, the savior became the one who needed saving. Her owner, Thomas, begged for help. The vet worked frantically. And as the first puppy was born, silent, still, time seemed to stop. Something wasn't right. The doctor's hands shook. The nurse began to pray. By midnight, the little clinic felt like the edge of the world. No one believed they'd make it. But Thomas whispered the same words again and again. "Don't leave me, girl. Not now." They say storms test the strength of everything that stands beneath them. But what happened next proved that love, even in its quietest form, can stand against anything, even death itself. The sky above Valley Creek was bruised with shades of purple and gray, a restless sea of clouds rolling low over the flat Texas plains. The wind carried the scent of dust and rain, the kind of scent that warned a man something was coming. Inside the old barn, Thomas Miller worked in silence, his weathered hands tightening the last latch on the stable door. His movements were slow, deliberate, not out of laziness, but out of the quiet rhythm of a man who had learned to live with time, not against it. Rex padded behind him, paws tapping lightly against the wooden floorboards. The German shepherd's once sleek coat had faded into a silvery tan with age, her eyes still sharp but tired at the edges. She was more than a dog, more than a friend. For Thomas, Rex was the last living soul who remembered what his home used to sound like before it went quiet. He paused, leaning against the barn door frame as thunder rumbled across the horizon. "Storm's comin'," he murmured, half to himself, half to her. Rex wagged her tail weakly, pressing close to his leg. He smiled, just a little. "We've seen worse, haven't we, girl?" Lightning blinked in the distance, slicing through the clouds like silver veins. Thomas's gaze drifted to the old farmhouse standing lonely against the storm. Every window was dark except one, the kitchen, where the faint orange glow of a lamp flickered like a heartbeat. For a moment, he saw it again. The fire from years ago, the night his world almost ended. The memory came not in words, but in flashes. The choking smoke, the burning rafters, his wife's voice calling from somewhere he could no longer reach. And then Rex, bursting through the flames, grabbing his shirt sleeve, dragging him out through the front door as the roof collapsed behind them. She had saved his life that night. Since then, she had never left his side. He exhaled shakily and pushed the memory away. "You and me, old girl. Always you and me." Rex gave a soft whine, not from nostalgia, but discomfort. Her steps grew uneven. She circled the barn twice, panting, her body trembling in a way Thomas had never seen. "Rex?" he said, his voice tightening. She scratched at the hay, then lay down and rose again, restless. When she turned toward him, he noticed it, the heavy swell of her belly, the strain in her breathing, the way her ribs shuddered with each exhale. A low dread crawled into his chest. "Oh God," he whispered. "It's time." He crouched beside her, hand trembling as he stroked her head. Her fur was damp with sweat and fear. She tried to lick his wrist, as if to reassure him, but her body betrayed her. Her muscles tensed, and she whimpered low, a sound that made the hair on his neck rise. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, fat and slow against the tin roof. Then came the wind, sudden, violent, slamming against the barn doors. The world darkened, as if the sky had swallowed the sun whole. Thomas hurried to grab an old blanket and the emergency kit he kept on the shelf. "Easy, girl. Easy," he murmured, his voice breaking. He'd helped her through a litter years ago, but this was different. She was older now, slower, and the look in her eyes wasn't just pain, it was confusion. Another flash of lightning split the air, followed instantly by a deafening crack. The barn shook. Somewhere in the distance, he heard the first claps of hail against the metal roof. Then, a sudden blackout. The single bulb overhead flickered and died. Damn it! He fumbled for his flashlight. The beam weak but enough to see Rex trembling violently, her sides contracting in short bursts. He could see her chest heave, her breathing shallow and uneven. Come on, girl, stay with me. Thomas's heartbeat thundered in his ears. The thought of losing her, Utatsu, this creature who had saved him from fire, loneliness, and grief, was unbearable. He knew he couldn't handle this alone. He had to get her to the clinic. He threw open the barn doors. Rain poured in sideways, soaking him instantly. Wind howled like a living thing. He wrapped Rex in the old wool blanket, the same one his late wife used to keep by the fireplace, and lifted her gently into his arms. She whimpered weakly, pressing her nose against his chest. It's okay, girl. I got you, he whispered, his voice trembling. We're going to see Dr. Carter. She'll know what to do. The storm outside was merciless. Thunder rolled across the land like cannon fire. Thomas struggled through the downpour toward his pickup truck, boots sinking into mud. He laid Rex carefully on the seat, shut the door, and climbed in. His hands shook as he turned the key. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. As the truck pulled out onto the road, the rain came harder. Wipers screeched across the windshield, useless against the torrent. Lightning turned the world white for half a second at a time, and each flash revealed the empty road stretching ahead, like a river of glass. Rex whimpered beside him, her breathing uneven, eyes dull but fixed on him. Thomas reached over, one hand on the wheel, the other on her paw. Hold on, girl. Just hold on. The tires skidded once on a sharp turn. His heart leapt into his throat. The truck fishtailed, headlights sweeping over the flooded ditch. He slammed the brakes, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then the tires caught traction again, jerking the truck back onto the road. Thomas gasped, a choked sound that was half sob, half prayer. He clutched Rex closer with one arm, rain hammering the windshield like fists. Don't you leave me now, girl, he cried hoarsely, voice breaking in the roar of the storm. Please don't. Not you too. Rex gave a faint whimper, her eyes fluttering shut as the truck sped through the rain-soaked darkness toward Hope Valley Clinic. A tiny flicker of light waiting miles ahead, the last fragile promise between man and dog. And in that desperate, storm-lashed night, Thomas Miller drove through the fury of nature itself, not just to save a dog, but to protect the last beating piece of his heart. Rain hammered against the clinic windows like 1,000 desperate knocks. The storm had followed Thomas Miller all the way from his farm, chasing him down the long road until he screeched to a halt in front of Hope Valley Veterinary Clinic, headlights cutting through sheets of rain. He leapt from the truck, mud splashing around his boots as he ran to the passenger side. Inside, Rex lay motionless, her breath shallow, her eyes flickering weakly. Hang on, girl, he murmured, voice trembling. We're here. We made it. The clinic's glass door banged open under the force of the wind as Thomas stumbled inside, soaked to the bone, clutching the heavy bundle of blanket and fur against his chest. The scent of disinfectant and metal filled his nose. The waiting room was empty. Only the flickering fluorescent lights and the faint hum of medical machines broke the silence. Behind the counter, Dr. Emily Carter looked up from her desk, startled by the sudden intrusion. Her face shifted instantly from surprise to focus. She was young, maybe early 30s, but her eyes carried the steady weight of experience. What happened? She asked, rushing forward as she caught sight of Rex's limp body. She's in labor, Thomas stammered. Something's wrong. She's not breathing right. Emily motioned for the back room. Get her on the table, she ordered sharply. Her assistant, Nurse Paul, emerged from the hall, pulling on gloves as he moved. The energy of the clinic changed in an instant, calm replaced by urgency, every motion fast but precise. Thomas laid Rex gently on the metal table. The cold surface made her twitch. She gave a soft, pitiful whine that sliced through the hum of the lights. Thomas reached for her paw, holding it like he would hold the hand of someone he couldn't bear to lose. Easy, girl. I'm here. Emily pressed the stethoscope to Rex's chest. Her brow furrowed. Heart rate's uneven, she said, her tone clipped. Breathing shallow. How long has she been in labor? Couple hours, maybe more. She started pacing around the barn before the storm hit. Then she couldn't stand anymore. Paul checked the monitors, his hands moving quickly, but with visible tension. Blood pressure's dropping. Emily nodded grimly. We need fluids, adrenaline on standby. Get the oxygen mask. The hiss of machines filled the room. Thomas stood frozen, his soaked jacket dripping onto the tile. He wanted to help, but didn't know how. His lips moved in soundless prayers, words only half formed, rising from a heart that had run out of language and logic. Thomas, Emily said softly, turning to him. She's critical, but we're not giving up. I need you to breathe. Let us work. He nodded numbly, stepping back, though his trembling hand never left Rex's paw. The storm outside roared louder, thunder shaking the window panes. The fluorescent lights flickered once, twice, before steadying again, casting everything in a pale, ghostly glow. Emily glanced at the heart monitor. Come on, girl, she whispered. Stay with me. She looked up at Paul. We'll need an ultrasound, now. The machine beeped as it powered on. Emily spread the gel across Rex's swollen belly, her gloved hand firm but gentle. The black and white screen came alive with fuzzy images, small shapes shifting faintly inside. For a moment, relief softened her expression. There, she said quietly. They're alive. Thomas exhaled shakily, his knees nearly buckling. Thank God. But then Emily's expression changed. She leaned closer to the monitor, adjusting the probe. The shapes flickered, blurred, then separated into distorted outlines that didn't look right. One of the small forms seemed to twist unnaturally, then vanish, only to reappear seconds later in a different spot. The rhythm of the beeps wavered. What is it? Thomas asked, panic creeping into his voice. Emily didn't answer at first. Could be interference from the storm, she said finally, though her tone wasn't convincing. Could just be the signal. Paul frowned. That's strange. Emily shot him a look, a silent command to stay quiet. She didn't want Thomas to hear the fear she felt herself. Rex's body tensed suddenly, a low growl rumbling in her throat as her abdomen contracted violently. Emily's attention snapped back to her. She's pushing again. Paul, be ready. The storm outside raged harder, wind howling through the gaps in the window frames. The clinic felt smaller by the second, the air thick with tension and the metallic scent of blood. Thomas stood helplessly near the wall, every muscle in his body coiled tight. He watched Emily's hands move with precision, checking vitals, adjusting monitors, murmuring calm instructions to her team. Yet something about her eyes told a different story. Fear. Controlled, hidden, but present. Then, without warning, Rex let out a sound that froze everyone where they stood. It wasn't a cry of pain or fear. It was deeper. A guttural, primal wail that seemed to rise from somewhere far beneath her ribs. The kind of sound that didn't belong in this world. It echoed off the metal tables, vibrating through the floor, silencing the machines for a heartbeat. The room went still. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. His eyes went wide as he stepped forward. "Rex?" Emily's gloved hand hovered midair, her eyes darting from the monitor to the dog. The heartbeat on the screen spiked erratically, flashing in jagged bursts of green. Paul swallowed hard. "Doctor, what the hell was that?" Emily didn't answer. Her face had gone pale, illuminated by the cold glow of the monitors. She forced herself to speak evenly, though her voice trembled. "Adrenaline ready. We're not stopping now." She reached for Rex's paw, pressing it gently. "Stay with us, girl. You've got lives depending on you." Outside, lightning flashed so bright it turned the room white for a second. The ultrasound monitor flickered again, this time clearly, revealing strange, shifting shadows that moved in unnatural sync. Then the image cut to static. Rex let out another cry, weaker but just as haunting, before collapsing against the table. Thomas lunged forward, tears streaming down his face. "No, please, she's all I've got!" Emily barked orders. "Oxygen! Compress the chest! Keep the line open!" But her voice sounded distant against the pounding of the storm and the hammering of Thomas's heart. For a long, unbearable moment, it seemed everything, the storm, the machines, the people, was holding its breath. Then Rex's chest rose again. Once. Twice. The monitors steadied, beeping back to rhythm. Emily exhaled shakily, her hands trembling from the release of tension. Thomas dropped to his knees beside the table, gripping Rex's paw, whispering, "You're okay, girl. You're okay." But even as the relief washed over him, Emily's eyes lingered on the dark ultrasound screen, where faint, irregular shadows still flickered and twisted, defying explanation. Something about this birth felt wrong. Not medical, not natural. And deep down, Emily Carter knew tonight was only the beginning. The storm outside hadn't eased. Rain continued to hammer against the windows, turning the glass into trembling mirrors of light and shadow. Inside Hope Valley Clinic, the world had narrowed to the glow of surgical lamps and the steady, fragile rhythm of Rex's heartbeat echoing through the monitor. Dr. Emily Carter stood poised over the table, her gloved hands slick with sweat beneath the latex. Every muscle in her body was tense. Her breath came in shallow bursts, the air heavy with antiseptic and fear. On the opposite side, Thomas Miller stood frozen, his weathered hands gripping his hat against his chest as if it were a prayer. His face was ghost pale, his lips moving soundlessly. "Okay," Emily whispered, voice steady but fragile. "She's ready. One more push, girl. Just one more." Rex whimpered softly, her body trembling with effort. Emily positioned herself, eyes fixed on the small opening of life that appeared beneath the sterile light. A moment later, a slick, wet shape slid into her palms, tiny, motionless, almost weightless. The first puppy. Emily's heart clenched. It wasn't moving. Its fur, what little there was, clung to gray, translucent skin. She wiped its nose and mouth, rubbing its chest gently. "Come on," she murmured. "Come on, little one. Don't give up yet." She pressed her thumbs rhythmically against its ribs, blowing softly into its mouth. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a sound. The faintest squeak barely audible beneath the thunder. Thomas gasped, his eyes widening. It's breathing," Emily said, relief flooding her voice. "Barely, but it's breathing." Paul, the nurse, handed her a towel. She wrapped the fragile newborn carefully, placing it under a heat lamp. The faint rise and fall of its chest was like a candle flame in the dark, weak but alive. For a moment, everyone in the room breathed again. But the reprieve lasted only seconds. Rex let out another groan, deeper this time, edged with pain. Emily's instincts flared. "Second one coming," she warned, her tone clipped. She leaned forward, guiding with steady hands. The next pup emerged smaller than the first. Too small. Its limbs were twisted slightly. The back leg bent in a way no newborns should be. The fur was sparse, the breathing ragged from the start. Paul's voice trembled. "Oh no. Don't say it," Emily cut in, her own voice cracking. She began stimulating the pup just like before, rubbing, blowing, praying. But this time the tiny body refused to respond. Thomas stepped closer, his breath hitching. "What's wrong? Why isn't it crying?" Emily didn't answer. She focused harder, rubbing its side, forcing air into its mouth. "Come on," she thought. "Please, come on." But the silence that followed was suffocating. Only the sound of rain filled the space, relentless and cruel. Then, finally, a faint twitch. A breath. A tiny, broken squeal. Emily's hands froze in midair. For a second, disbelief flashed across her face. Then she moved again, faster this time, wrapping the puppy and placing it beside the first. "That's it," she whispered, tears threatening to spill. "Stay with me." But when she looked up, Thomas was already weeping. He wasn't the kind of man who cried. Not since he buried his wife. Not since the night the fire took everything except Rex. But now, watching her struggle, seeing the small, twisted shapes of her puppies, the only things left of her, something inside him broke. The third pup came minutes later, smaller still. When Emily lifted it from Rex's side, a tremor passed through her. This one was worse, limp, barely formed, as though nature had run out of strength halfway through creation. Its chest rose unevenly, a stuttering gasp that sent shivers down her spine. Paul turned away, unable to look. Emily closed her eyes for a brief moment, then gathered herself, forcing professionalism to cage the horror clawing at her heart. "Get another towel. We're not giving up." She rubbed, massaged, whispered encouragement. "You're not done, little one. You fight. You hear me?" Her voice was shaking now, the tremor of a person begging the universe to listen. Thomas stepped closer. His hand reached out, stopping inches from her shoulder. "Please," he whispered, "tell me they'll live." Emily didn't look at him. Her focus stayed on the tiny life in her hands. "I don't know," she said finally, barely above a whisper. "I just don't know." The storm outside cracked open like an explosion. Lightning flooded the room with white light, throwing everyone's faces into sharp relief. The panic, the exhaustion, the silent terror. And then, Rex screamed. It was raw and guttural, the sound of agony and defiance. Her entire body convulsed. The heart monitor spiked. Thomas's hat fell from his hands as he lunged forward, catching her head between trembling palms. "It's okay, girl. I'm here," he cried, tears streaming freely now. "You've saved so many lives. Now save your own." His voice broke into a sob, his body shaking. The sound of it filled the sterile room, too human to ignore. Even Paul, who had seen death before, turned away to hide the tears brimming in his eyes. Emily pressed her hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Keep talking to her," she said softly. "She knows your voice." Thomas leaned close, forehead resting against Rex's fur. "You remember the fire, girl?" he whispered through tears. "You didn't give up then. Don't you give up now." Rex gave a weak whine, her paw twitching against his hand. Emily's focus darted to the monitors. One by one, the heartbeats of the newborns flickered erratically. The first one was breathing, shallow but steady. The second, weaker. The third, still struggling, as though caught between two worlds. "Hold on," Emily whispered, voice breaking. "All of you, hold on." The thunder roared again, closer this time, shaking the windows in their frames. Rain streaked the glass in blinding waves, the lightning flashing bright enough to silhouette the four figures in the room. The farmer, the doctor, the nurse, and the dying mother dog, all fighting a battle too fragile for words. For one endless minute, there was no separation between prayer and medicine, no wall between science and faith, just trembling hands, wet eyes, and the sound of tiny broken breaths struggling to stay. Thomas looked down at Rex. Her eyes were glassy, her chest rising and falling like waves caught in a storm. He cradled her head, pressing his forehead against hers. "You're my hero," he whispered hoarsely. "Don't you quit on me, not now." And just as another bolt of lightning illuminated the sky outside, one of the puppies, the smallest, weakest one, let out a thin, piercing squeak that echoed through the clinic like a plea answered. Everyone froze. Emily's eyes widened. Paul covered his mouth. The sound, frail, trembling, miraculous, broke through the chaos like the first breath of dawn. For a brief moment, even the storm seemed to pause to listen, and though no one spoke it aloud, they all knew the truth that trembled between them. Life had chosen to fight back. By dawn, the storm had swallowed Valley Creek whole. Wind tore through the streets, bending the trees until they groaned, and rain struck rooftops like 1,000 fists. The faint orange glow from Hope Valley Clinic was the only light in town, a fragile beacon trembling against the darkness. Word had already spread. First came the whispers, passed from the gas station clerk to the diner waitress, from the late-night trucker to the sheriff half asleep in his patrol car. "Thomas Miller's dog's given birth," someone said. "At the clinic. Heard it ain't normal." By the time the clock struck 6, a small crowd had gathered outside the clinic, huddled under dripping umbrellas, their faces lit by flashes of lightning. No one dared go inside. They just stood there, waiting, murmuring, afraid to say too much. "It's cursed," a woman whispered, pulling her coat tighter. "They say the pups came out half-formed." "Don't talk nonsense," an old man snapped, though his eyes darted nervously toward the clinic windows. "Thomas's dog's been protecting this town for years. Don't you forget that." Still, unease lingered in the air like smoke. The rain ran down their umbrellas in rivulets, pooling at their boots. Behind the glass, they could see shapes moving. Doctors, shadows, flashes of silver instruments under white light. It looked like another world in there. Sterile, bright, and full of attention none of them could name. Inside, Dr. Emily Carter moved with quiet fury. Her hair clung to her face, damp with sweat. Her hands never stopped. "More towels," she ordered. "Get the oxygen line steady." Nurse Paul fumbled with the equipment, his fingers shaking. He'd never seen anything like this. The air smelled of blood and alcohol, thick and metallic. The puppies, what few there were, lay bundled in small cloths, each chest rising with fragile rhythm. Emily's voice cut through the noise. "Keep the heat on. Them. Every second counts." Paul nodded, but his composure was slipping. "Emily, look at them," he whispered. "This isn't right. Their limbs, their breathing." "I know what I'm looking at," she snapped, her tone sharp but breaking under the weight of exhaustion. "We don't stop." In the corner, a third nurse, young, trembling, whispered prayers beneath her breath. Her lips moved silently, eyes locked on the table, as if afraid that even blinking might disturb the balance of life and death playing out before her. And then Rex whimpered. Emily froze. "Get me the monitor reading," she said quickly. Paul turned, eyes widening at the screen. The line was erratic, spiking, dipping, fluttering like a dying flame. Heart rates crashing. Emily pressed her hand to Rex's chest. The dog's muscles spasmed once, then went still. "No, no, no," Emily muttered, her voice trembling. "Don't you dare give up on me!" She reached for the syringe. "Adrenaline. Now!" Paul hesitated for a heartbeat. just one, then passed it to her. Emily plunged the needle into Rex's leg and began compressions. 1, 2, 3, breathe. Her voice cracked, but her rhythm didn't falter. Come on, girl. You're stronger than this. Thomas stood at the edge of the room, his face ghostly under the white light. He couldn't move, couldn't think. He just stared at the table where Rex lay still, her chest no longer rising. His heart screamed, but no sound left his lips. Outside, thunder rolled again, long and low, like the sky itself was groaning. Emily pressed again, harder this time. Come on, she cried. You fought through fire, you can fight this. Paul's hand was on her shoulder now. Doctor. Not yet, she snapped, sweat dripping down her temple. Not yet. The nurse in the corner had begun crying quietly, still whispering her prayer. The rain pounded harder, echoing through the walls like a heartbeat that refused to die. And then, a twitch. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but Emily saw it. Rex's paw jerked. A second later, her chest rose in a shallow gasp. The heart monitor flickered, then steadied into a weak, uncertain rhythm. She's back, Emily breathed, voice trembling. She's back. Thomas collapsed against the counter, his legs giving way. His breath came out in a sound somewhere between a sob and a prayer. Thank you, God. Thank you. But Emily's relief was fleeting. She could feel it, the fragility, the thin thread they were all hanging by. Rex's pulse was faint, fading. Her eyes fluttered half open, glazed but searching, as if looking for Thomas. He rushed to her side, kneeling, clutching her paw in both hands. I'm here, girl, he whispered. I'm right here. You did good. Just rest now. Rex's gaze softened, a single tear glistening in the corner of her eye. Or maybe it was rain from Thomas's sleeve. Her breath shuddered, the rise and fall of her chest shallow, but steady enough to bring hope. Emily stood back for a moment, her gloves streaked with blood, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Around her, the clinic felt frozen in time. The storm, the people outside, the nurses holding their breath. The puppies under the lamp twitched weakly, their small bodies glistening with moisture. Each movement a miracle and a curse at once. Outside, another murmur spread through the crowd. They're still alive, someone whispered. She's still fighting. But not everyone believed it. If she lives, another voice said quietly, it's not by nature's will. It's something else. Their words drifted through the wind, through the cracks in the walls, until they reached Emily's ears like echoes of doubt. She looked up at the window, where the shapes of the townsfolk shifted under the rain. Dark silhouettes staring in, afraid to come closer. Her jaw tightened. Let them talk, she muttered under her breath. We'll let the truth speak for itself. Thunder cracked again, shaking the glass. The fluorescent light flickered once, then twice. Emily turned back to Rex, who lay barely conscious, the line on the monitor rising and falling like fragile waves. Paul exhaled shakily. Doctor, what if she doesn't make it? Emily didn't answer. Her eyes moved between the mother and the tiny bodies under the lamp. Life, barely clinging, but life nonetheless. Then we keep fighting, she said finally, her voice low but unwavering, because that's what she would do. A heavy silence followed. The storm outside broke into a full downpour, the rain hitting the windows so hard it drowned the whispers beyond the walls. Inside, the world seemed to hold its breath, suspended between hope and heartbreak. Emily lowered her gloves, her shoulders trembling, her eyes glistening under the sterile light. Thomas still knelt beside Rex, whispering soft words that no one else could hear. For a moment, there was nothing but the rhythm of rain and the faint, uneven beeping of the heart monitor. A fragile, imperfect sound that somehow still meant life. And as the storm wept against the clinic's walls, it felt as if the whole world outside was mourning with them and praying that this battle, against all odds, was not yet lost. Midnight came and went, but the storm refused to sleep. Rain slashed sideways across the windows of Hope Valley Clinic, drowning the world outside in an endless gray. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, flickering every so often as thunder rolled over the roof. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with the smell of antiseptic, sweat, and quiet desperation. Thomas Miller sat beside the operating table, his flannel shirt clinging to his back, his boots soaked through. He hadn't moved for hours. His weathered hand rested gently on Rex's paw, thumb tracing the fur that had begun to thin with age. She lay still under a soft blanket, chest rising and falling with shallow, fragile rhythm. "Stay with me, girl," he whispered hoarsely, his voice rasping from exhaustion. "You don't get to quit on me. Not now." Her ear twitched faintly at the sound of his voice. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him anchored. He wiped at his eyes and tried to smile, though his face trembled. On the counter beside him, a small box glowed beneath the heat of a lamp. Inside, the newborns shifted weakly, their cries soft as raindrops. Emily Carter and Nurse Paul took turns tending to them, massaging their fragile bodies, rubbing their chests, keeping the air warm and damp. Each faint squeak was met with a sigh of relief. Each moment of silence stretched like a blade across their hearts. "Temperature's holding," Paul murmured, his voice rough from fatigue. Emily nodded, her movements mechanical, her eyes glassy with exhaustion. "Keep rotating them every 5 minutes. We can't let their lungs cool." Thunder boomed again, shaking the glass in its frame. The lamp flickered once, just enough to draw Thomas's eyes upward. He glanced toward the window, watching as lightning briefly illuminated the crowd still gathered outside. A few figures huddled beneath umbrellas, unmoving, waiting. He looked down again at Rex, brushing his hand over her muzzle. "They're talking about you out there," he said softly. "Always did like to stir up a crowd, huh?" She didn't stir this time. His heart clenched. For a moment, he closed his eyes, and the world slipped away. He was back on the porch of his old farmhouse years ago, before the fire. His wife, Margaret, sat beside him, her laughter mixing with the summer wind, her hand brushing crumbs off his knee. Rex had been just a pup then, clumsy and eager, chasing after fireflies in the tall grass. He could hear Margaret's voice like it was yesterday. "When you save something, Thomas, you save yourself. Every act of love you give out comes back someday. That's the only way we stay whole." The memory burned bright in his chest. It was what kept him breathing now, long after his strength had run dry. He opened his eyes and whispered, "You were right, Maggie. You always were." Emily's voice cut through his thoughts. "Thomas, she's stable for now," she said gently. "You should rest. Just a few minutes." "I can't," he said, shaking his head. "Not while she's breathing." Emily didn't argue. She understood. Instead, she turned back to the puppies. The faint squeaks had slowed. She frowned, leaning closer. One of them, the smallest, a patchy little thing wrapped in a blue towel, had gone eerily still. "Paul," she said sharply, "check this one." The nurse moved quickly, his fingers pressing against the tiny rib cage. He looked up, pale. No movement. For a split second, no one spoke. The only sound was the storm, roaring like distant grief. Then Thomas rose from his chair. "No," he whispered. "No, not that one." He reached out with trembling hands, and Emily hesitated. But she saw the look in his eyes, and she let him take the pup. He held it in his palms, so small it barely filled them, its body limp and cold. Tears welled in his eyes before he could stop them. "Come on, little one," he whispered brokenly. "You fight, you hear? Your mama didn't come this far for you to stop now." His voice cracked on the last word. He bowed his head, the sobs shaking his shoulders. Emily swallowed hard. Her hands moved on instinct, firm, practiced, desperate. She took the pup gently from his palms, pressing her fingers against its chest, massaging with quick, rhythmic pressure. "Come on," she muttered. "Breathe." Paul readied a dropper of oxygen. Emily leaned close, breathing softly into the tiny muzzle, her lips trembling. "Come on, sweetheart. Come back." Nothing. The room felt colder. Even the storm outside seemed to fade into a dull hum. Thomas sank to his knees beside the table, his hands clasped like a man praying at an altar. "Please, God," he whispered, his voice barely a sound. "Don't take this one too." Emily tried again, pressing, breathing, rubbing. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Her hands were cramping, but she refused to stop. And then, just when all hope began to bleed out of the room, the pup twitched. It was faint, almost too small to notice. Then another twitch. And then a breath. A broken, gasping breath that filled the silence like music. Emily froze, eyes wide. Disbelief etched across her face. Then she laughed, a sound more like a sob. "He's breathing," she said, her voice cracking. "Oh my God, he's breathing." Thomas looked up, his face wet, his mouth trembling. "Say that again," he whispered. "He's breathing," Emily repeated, louder this time. She wrapped the pup in a fresh towel, holding it close to the heat lamp. Its chest rose again, stronger this time. Paul let out a shaky laugh, wiping his face with his sleeve. "I don't believe it," he murmured. Emily turned to Thomas. "You did that," she said softly. "He heard you." Thomas pressed a trembling hand to his face, his breath hitching as tears of relief spilled freely. "No," he said. "We all did. Every one of us." Rex stirred faintly on the table, as if in agreement. Her breathing deepened, the faintest wag of her tail brushing the edge of the sheet. The room fell silent again. Not the silence of fear, but the kind that follows a miracle. Emily's eyes met Thomas's. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. In that moment, something shifted. Not in the storm, not in the clinic, but in the hearts of everyone there. The line between despair and faith had blurred completely, and on the other side, hope was breathing again. Time lost its meaning inside the walls of Hope Valley Clinic. The clock on Trenta, the wall ticked, but no one noticed. Hours bled together, measured only by the fading strength of the storm and the trembling breaths of the lives they were trying to save. The room smelled of coffee, sweat, and disinfectant, but beneath it all lingered the metallic tang of fear. Empty coffee cups lined the counter, stacked beside half-eaten granola bars and crumpled paper towels. The once sterile clinic now looked lived in, not chaotic but sacred, like a chapel of survival. No one spoke above a whisper. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Thomas sat hunched on a metal chair beside the examination table. His head rested on folded arms, his hat lying forgotten on the floor. He hadn't slept in more than 20 hours, but his eyes refused to close. Every time he blinked, he saw Rex, his loyal German shepherd, trembling beneath the thin white blanket. Her chest rose unevenly, each breath a battle, her once proud body now frail beneath the weight of exhaustion. Across the room, Emily Carter and Nurse Paul worked in turns, their movements slow but precise. The puppies lay bundled under a glowing lamp, tiny bodies twitching as they fought for warmth. Each small movement was a victory. Each faint cry, a hymn. "Temperature's steady," Paul murmured, glancing at the monitor. His voice was hoarse, his eyes rimmed red. Emily nodded, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Good. That's good. Outside, the rain had eased to a soft drizzle. The thunder that once roared across the valley now lingered far away, like a dying heartbeat. Through the clinic's fogged windows, faint candlelight shimmered. It took Emily a moment to realize what she was seeing. She moved closer, wiping the condensation from the glass. Dozens of townspeople stood beyond the gate, their umbrellas gone, faces pale and wet from rain. Each one held a candle cupped in trembling hands. She blinked, stunned. The same crowd that had whispered about curses only hours before now stood vigil, not in judgment, but in prayer. Paul stepped beside her, whispering, "They haven't left since midnight. Someone said they started lighting candles for the dog." Emily swallowed hard. For her, or for us? Maybe both, Paul said softly. Back inside, Thomas stirred. His eyes were sunken, but when he lifted them toward the window and saw the flickering light outside, his lips parted in disbelief. "They're still out there," Emily nodded. "Looks like they're praying." He turned back toward Rex and the pups. His hand trembled as he reached to stroke her head. "You hear that, girl? They're praying for you now. Guess you've still got the whole town watching over you." Rex stirred faintly. Her ear twitched. A weak sigh escaped her throat, part exhaustion, part acknowledgement. She shifted slightly on the table, her body trembling from the effort. Then, with slow, deliberate movement, she nudged her muzzle toward the box of towels where her puppies slept. Emily noticed first. "She's trying to move," she said quietly. Thomas leaned closer, confusion softening into understanding. He realized what Rex was doing. The motion wasn't random. It was instinct, maternal and pure. She was pushing her pups closer to the heat, closer to life. His throat tightened. "She's telling me it's my turn," he whispered. "She's saying goodbye." Emily's eyes glistened. She didn't argue. She knew the look of an animal passing its duty along. She'd seen it before, but never like this. Never with so much grace. Rex's paw twitched as if reaching for him. Thomas caught it in both hands, his rough fingers wrapping around her soft fur. "You've done enough," he whispered, voice shaking. "You rest now. I'll keep him safe. I promise." The room went still again. Outside, a fresh gust of wind pressed against the windows, scattering raindrops across the glass like tears. Inside, the heart monitor kept its fragile rhythm. Steady, weak, but alive. Emily took a step back, giving Thomas space. Paul turned off the overhead lights, leaving only the lamp by the puppies glowing warm in the dim room. The clinic was hushed now, half hospital, half church. For a long time, no one spoke. They just listened. To the faint hum of the machines, the whisper of the rain, and the distant rustle of candles flickering outside. The night stretched on endlessly. Thomas whispered softly, telling Rex old stories about the farm, how she'd chased off coyotes, how she'd slept on the porch through every storm, how she'd never once left his side. His words were half prayer, half farewell. And still, she listened. Her breathing grew shallower, each rise of her chest slower than the last. Yet when the smallest of her puppies whimpered under the lamp, Rex's eyes opened just enough to glance toward the sound. Her paw twitched once more. Thomas saw it. He understood. "I know, girl," he said softly. "You're still watching over him, even now." Emily stepped forward, gently checking Rex's pulse. Her expression softened, a fragile smile forming through her exhaustion. "She's holding on," she whispered, "just long enough to see the morning." And then, as if the universe had heard her, The first pale light of dawn crept through the rain-smeared windows. It was subtle at first, a silver shimmer breaking through the gray. Then, slowly, it grew, spilling across the clinic floor, washing over the steel table, the counters, the tired faces that had fought so long through the night. The light reached the puppies last. At that very moment, one of them, the smallest, the one Thomas had nearly lost, let out a faint cry. Then another joined it, and another. A chorus of tiny, trembling cries filled the room, weak but alive, rising in harmony with the morning light. Emily froze, tears pooling in her eyes. Paul's hand flew to his mouth. Thomas lifted his head, disbelief etched across his face. "They made it," he breathed. "They're alive." He turned toward Rex. Her eyes were barely open now, her chest rising in shallow rhythm, but the sound of her pups crying seemed to steady her breathing, if only for a moment. Emily felt her throat tighten. She reached for Thomas's shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. He shook his head, eyes never leaving Rex. "No, she did." For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. They simply stood in the fragile stillness of that dawn, surrounded by the faint cries of survival. Then Emily exhaled, her voice trembling as she said the only words that felt right. "They made it through the night." And as sunlight finally broke through the last of the storm clouds, the exhausted staff wept quietly. Not from sorrow, not from relief, but from grace. Because in that little clinic on the edge of Valley Creek, they had witnessed something sacred. The kind of miracle that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, but whispers, soft and eternal, life still goes on. Morning broke soft and pale over Valley Creek, washing the soaked earth in muted gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a fragile calm, the kind that comes only after a night that has taken too much. A thin fog lingered above the fields, curling gently against the clinic's frosted windows. Inside, everything was quiet. The world, it seemed, was still catching its breath. The floor was littered with traces of the long fight. Empty coffee cups, used gauze, a dropped stethoscope, and a single wet towel lying forgotten near the heater. Thomas Miller sat hunched on a chair beside Rex's table, the lines on his face deeper than before. His eyes were red, his clothes stiff from dried rain. But in his lap, wrapped in a small flannel cloth, was one of the puppies, breathing softly, its tiny ribs rising like ripples on still water. Rex lay nearby, her head resting on her paws, her breaths shallow but steady. She was alive, fragile, scarred, but alive. Dr. Emily Carter moved quietly through the room, checking monitors, adjusting the lamps that warmed the small litter. Her movements had slowed. After the chaos of the night, every step now felt deliberate, almost reverent. "Their vitals are stable," she said softly, glancing at the chart in her hand. "We made it through the hardest part." Thomas didn't look up. His thumb brushed over the pup's soft ear, tracing the delicate veins beneath the translucent skin. "They don't look right," he murmured. "They're so small, too small." Emily hesitated, then pulled a stool closer, sitting beside him. "You're right. They are underdeveloped." He turned his head, eyes clouded with worry. "Underdeveloped?" She nodded, choosing her words carefully. "They're showing signs of premature birth, weak limbs, thin coats, irregular breathing patterns. But that doesn't make sense. By my records, Rex wasn't due early." She paused, frowning slightly. "It's like something interrupted their growth, but not the timing of their birth." Thomas's grip tightened around the puppy. "So it's my fault," he said quietly. "I must have done something. Fed her wrong. Worked her too hard. Maybe she was too old." "Thomas," Emily interrupted gently. her tone firm but kind. "Stop!" He looked at her, his lip trembling. "She trusted me to take care of her, and I let this happen." Emily set the chart down and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't fail her," she said softly. "You gave her what no medicine could. Love. And that's more than any of us can offer." For a moment he couldn't answer. His jaw worked, his throat constricted, but no words came out. The puppy in his hands squirmed faintly, pressing its nose into the fabric as if searching for warmth. Thomas lifted it closer to his chest, his eyes glistening. "If love alone could heal you," he whispered, voice shaking, "you'd all be running through the fields by now." The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy all at once. Emily's breath caught. She wanted to say something comforting, scientific, certain, but nothing came. There was no manual for moments like this. Instead, she watched. The farmer sat there, shoulders trembling, cradling the smallest life in the room with the kind of tenderness that could break a heart. His rough hands, the same ones that had built fences, dug graves, and worked the land for decades, were shaking as they held that tiny heartbeat close. Tears slipped silently down his face, not the wild, desperate tears of fear, but the slow, aching kind that come when a man realizes the world doesn't owe him miracles. And yet, somehow, he's been given one. Rex stirred on the table. Her ear flicked, and her eyes fluttered open. Weakly, she lifted her head, gaze falling on Thomas and the pup in his arms. A soft whine escaped her. Thomas smiled through his tears. "Look at her, girl," he murmured. "They're breathing. They're fighting, just like you taught 'em." Emily turned away briefly, pretending to check the monitors again, not because she needed to, but because her vision had blurred. Something inside her was shifting, unraveling the boundary between doctor and witness, science and soul. When she looked back, the morning light had grown stronger, filtering through the blinds in thin stripes that stretched across the room. The puppies glowed beneath the warmth, their small forms stirring faintly. The air felt different now, lighter, alive. "I've delivered hundreds of litters," Emily said quietly, her voice almost reverent. "But I've never seen this. Puppies this weak, surviving a night like that." Thomas gave a tired smile. "Guess they take after their mama." Emily's lips curved faintly. "Maybe. Or maybe they take after the man who refused to give up on them." He shook his head. "Nah, I just did what I could. God and her did the rest." He nodded toward Rex, who was now watching the pups with heavy, blinking eyes. "That old girl's heart has more strength than the whole town put together." Outside, the fog began to lift. A few early risers passed the clinic, peering through the windows, not out of fear this time, but curiosity and quiet respect. Someone had left a small bouquet of wildflowers by the door. The gossip that had once whispered curse now carried a different word through the valley. Miracle. Emily walked to the window and stood there for a long moment, watching the light crawl across the wet earth. Behind her, the farmer hummed softly under his breath, an old tune, cracked and trembling, but full of love. When she turned back, she saw it. Not the exhaustion, not the grief, but something else in his eyes. Resolve. The kind of faith that doesn't shout or demand, but endures. She smiled faintly. "Thomas," she said softly, "I think what happened here, it's not something we'll ever explain." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Don't need to," he said. "Some things ain't meant to be understood, just cherished." Emily nodded slowly, her throat tightening. She glanced toward the table where the puppies slept and Rex watched over them, her breathing calm now, steady. In that fragile morning silence, Emily realized what she had witnessed was not a triumph of medicine, nor a quirk of nature. It was something far greater, the miracle of will, born from love that refused to let go. The storm had tested them all, man, beast, and healer alike. But now, in the hush of dawn, surrounded by the smallest, weakest lives she'd ever seen, Emily Carter understood. Sometimes, survival isn't about strength at all. It's about the heart's stubborn refusal to stop beating, even when everything else says it should. Days slipped by like slow-moving clouds over Valley Creek. The storm was long gone, leaving the air crisp and clean, the fields glistening under the return of the Texas sun. But inside Hope Valley Clinic, time moved differently, not by minutes or hours, but by breaths, heartbeats, and the fragile rhythm of recovery. Thomas Miller never went home. His truck sat parked in the same spot outside, mud splattered up its sides, windshield streaked with dried rain. Every night, he unfolded a cot in the corner of the clinic and slept within arm's reach of Rex and her pups. His flannel shirt smelled of disinfectant and coffee. His eyes were rimmed red, but there was a quiet fire in them, the kind of strength born only from love and loss. He'd learned everything now: how to sterilize bottles, how to measure out milk, how to rub each puppy's chest to keep the blood flowing. His thick, weathered hands, once built for swinging tools and baling hay, now moved with the care of a surgeon. Slow and steady, Dr. Emily Carter reminded him as she handed him a warm bottle. Thomas nodded, smiling faintly. "Hope's got a mean appetite, Doc. She takes after her mama." Emily's lips curved. "Hope, huh?" He nodded toward the smallest pup, a tiny patch of fur just beginning to fill in around its face. "That's her. The middle one's Faith. And that fighter there." He gestured to the pup whose breathing had once faltered on the first night. "That one's Valor." Emily's smile softened, the exhaustion in her eyes replaced by something gentler. "Hope, Faith, and Valor," she repeated quietly. "That sounds about right." As the days passed, the clinic changed. Where there had once been whispers of fear and superstition, now there was life, fragile, flickering, but real. The front doorbell rang daily with visitors from town. Farmers, shopkeepers, even school children came by to check on the pups. They brought milk, blankets, and sometimes just silent apologies wrapped in small gestures. A loaf of bread, a cup of soup, a quiet, "We were wrong." The clinic's waiting room, once heavy with tension, now buzzed with warmth. The townspeople who had once stood in the rain calling Rex cursed, now knelt beside her, whispering thanks. "Would you look at that?" one old woman said softly, wiping her eyes as she watched the pups wriggle beneath the lamp. "Miracles do come in small packages." Emily would smile politely, though deep down she knew this was no simple miracle. It was work, grueling, tireless, human work. But maybe, she thought, that's what miracles really were. Not lightning bolts or divine intervention, just love refusing to quit. Thomas became the heart of it all. Every morning, he'd brew a pot of bitter black coffee, hum an old tune, and check on the pups before even thinking about himself. Sometimes Emily would find him sitting by the window, one pup asleep on his chest, the sunrise spilling across his tired face. "Guess they like my heartbeat," he said once, chuckling. "Can't say I blame 'em. Been beaten hard enough for all of us lately." Rex, though still weak, had begun to heal too. Her fur regained its shine, and her eyes, once glazed with exhaustion, now followed her puppy's every movement. She couldn't stand for long, but when she did, she'd lean over their box and nudge them gently, her maternal instincts guiding her through pain. Emily often paused to watch them, the farmer, the mother, the pups. Together, they made the clinic feel less like a medical facility and more like a chapel. Each sound, the soft yips, the clink of bottles, the murmur of whispered prayers, felt sacred. But despite the progress, not every day was easy. There were nights when one of the pups wouldn't eat, or their breathing grew too shallow. Thomas and Emily would sit side by side, refusing to sleep, taking turns keeping watch. "You ever think," Thomas asked one evening, voice low, "that maybe this was meant to happen? Not the pain part, but the rest of it. The way people came together again." Emily considered his words. "Maybe. Sometimes life has to break before it can teach." He nodded slowly. "She's been teaching me plenty." He looked over at Rex, who was dozing peacefully beside her pups. "About patience. About faith. About not giving up when it hurts." Emily smiled softly. "And about love." He chuckled, wiping at his eyes with a calloused hand. "Yeah, that too." The weeks went on, and the small clinic grew into a place of quiet pilgrimage. Children would press their faces to the glass, peeking in at the tiny pups. Old men would stop by with small bags of dog food, pretending it was for the clinic, though everyone knew it was for Thomas. The town that had once whispered curses now whispered hope. And then, one evening near sunset, as golden light poured across the clinic floor, something changed. Thomas sat beside the pups, humming softly, while Emily updated charts by the counter. Faith and valor slept soundly, but hope, the smallest, began to stir. She shifted her tiny paws, wriggling beneath the towel. "Doc," Thomas whispered, "come look." Emily turned just as Hope lifted her head. Her eyes, those impossibly small, clouded eyes that had been shut since the night of her birth, blinked once. Then again, a shimmer of reflection caught the light. Her eyes had opened. Thomas gasped. "Well, I'll be—" Hope blinked again, squinting at the world she'd nearly never seen. Then, from deep within her fragile chest, came a sharp, high-pitched yelping cry, loud, defiant, alive. The sound cut through the air like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Emily froze, her pen slipping from her hand. The cry came again, stronger this time, and before she could stop herself, tears spilled down her cheeks. Thomas laughed through his own tears, lifting the pup gently in his palms. "You hear that, girl?" he said, turning toward Rex, who had stirred at the sound. "She's singing for you." Rex lifted her head weakly, tail thumping once against the blanket. Her eyes glistened, proud, tired, full of something that needed no words. Emily wiped her face, smiling through her tears. "That's not just a cry," she said softly. "That's her way of saying she's staying." Thomas chuckled, voice trembling. "Stubborn, just like her mama." The room was quiet again, save for the soft hum of the heater and the steady rhythm of 3 tiny hearts beating in unison. Outside, the evening air shimmered with the last light of day, the horizon burning orange and gold. And in that small-town clinic, once haunted by whispers of fear, life triumphed not with thunder or glory, but in the simplest, most beautiful way. A single, fragile voice rising in the quiet, proof that sometimes the smallest cry can carry hope. The Texas sun had returned, soft and golden, spilling warmth over the rolling fields of Valley Creek. The air smelled of spring and hay, the kind that clings to memory like a photograph left in sunlight too long. Weeks had passed since the storm, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Thomas Miller's farm was alive with sound. Tiny barks, clumsy paws thudding against the grass, the squeals of young life discovering the world. 3 German shepherd puppies, once fragile and barely breathing, now tumbled through the yard like wind-blown tumbleweeds, chasing butterflies and one another with joyful abandon. Hope, the smallest of the litter, bounded after a drifting leaf, missed it completely, and rolled onto her back. Her siblings, Faith and Valor, pounced immediately, tails wagging furiously. Their laughter, yes, it was laughter, the kind only animals could make, filled the air. Under the shade of the old oak tree, Rex lay watching them, her eyes half closed, her breathing steady and calm. Her once matted fur now shimmered faintly in the sunlight, though her scars remained, pale reminders of the night she almost didn't make it. But they no longer looked like wounds. They looked like medals. Her head lifted slightly as Faith tripped over a root and yelped, only to tumble into Valor's side. Rex gave a low, approving rumble, half warning, half affection, and the pups scrambled back to their feet, chastened but still full of mischief. On the porch, Thomas leaned against the railing, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands. The wrinkles around his eyes had softened. The exhaustion that had once dragged at his every step had melted into quiet gratitude. He watched his dogs, his family, with a smile that reached all the way to his heart. The sun gleamed off the metal of Rex's old police tag, which he had hung from the tree branch above her. It swung gently in the breeze, chiming faintly, like the echo of a past life saluting the present. From down the dirt road came the sound of voices. The townsfolk were arriving again, but not with suspicion, not with fear. They came carrying baskets and laughter, children running ahead with handfuls of wildflowers. Some leaned over the wooden fence. Others stood back, hats in hand, their eyes glistening as they watched the scene unfold. "Would you look at that?" said Mrs. Donnelly, the grocer's wife, pressing a hand to her chest. "They weren't cursed after all." "No," murmured old Earl, the blacksmith, his voice thick with emotion. "They were chosen." The words spread softly among the crowd, carried by the breeze. Chosen. One of the children, a small girl with braids, squeezed through the fence and tiptoed toward the puppies. She knelt in the grass, holding out her hand. Faith sniffed curiously, then licked her palm, tail wagging so hard it sent her tumbling sideways. The little girl giggled, clutching the pup to her chest, as her mother smiled through tears. Thomas set his coffee down and walked toward them, wiping his hands on his jeans. His boots pressed into the soft soil, still damp from the last rainfall. When he reached the fence, the villagers greeted him with quiet warmth, nods, pats on the shoulder, murmured apologies that didn't need words. "You kept your promise, Thomas," Earl said gruffly. "You saved 'em." Thomas shook his head, smiling faintly. "Nah," he said softly. "They saved me." A ripple of emotion spread through the crowd. Even Emily Carter, who had arrived late, stood near the gate, watching the scene with misted eyes. She hadn't come as a doctor this time. She'd come as family. Rex lifted her head at the sound of Emily's footsteps and wagged her tail, slow but steady. Emily knelt beside her, running a hand along the dog's back. "You did good, girl," she whispered. "You did real good." The sunlight caught the tears on her cheeks as she turned to Thomas. "You know," she said softly, "every time I look at them, I still can't believe they made it." Thomas chuckled, his voice thick. "Guess they had a little too much fight in 'em to quit." Emily smiled, looking back at the pups as they darted through the grass, tripping over their own paws, barking at shadows. "You ever think they'll remember what happened?" she asked. Thomas gazed out at them, at hope chasing the wind, at Valor wrestling with his own tail, at Faith curling up beside Rex's paw. His voice was quiet but sure. "Maybe not in their minds," he said. "But in their hearts? Yeah. They'll know what it means to fight for life, to keep going even when it hurts." The words hung in the warm air, sinking into the soil, the trees, the souls of everyone listening. Then came a sound, soft at first, then louder. It wasn't barking, it was laughter. Thomas was laughing. Not the tired chuckle he'd managed in the weeks before, but a full, unguarded laugh that echoed through the fields. And as if understanding the meaning of that sound, the puppies came bounding toward him in a blur of fur and sunlight. Hope reached him first, leaping clumsily into his lap, followed by Faith and Valor, tumbling over one another in joyous chaos. He knelt in the grass, laughing through tears, his large hands trembling as they gathered the wriggling pups close. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice breaking. "Easy, little ones." Hope licked his chin, tail wagging wildly. Faith pawed at his sleeve, while Valor gnawed playfully on his bootlace. Around them, the villagers watched in silence, some smiling, some wiping at their eyes, all feeling the same unspoken truth settle over them. These weren't just animals. They were proof, living, breathing proof, that love could outlast despair, that life could bloom again even from the darkest night. Thomas's voice was barely a whisper when he spoke next, but everyone heard it. "You've turned our pain into joy," he said, looking down at the pups through a sheen of tears. "Every one of you." Rex lifted her head again, her gaze steady and proud. The light danced in her amber eyes as if the world itself was reflected there. The fields, the people, the laughter, the new beginning. Emily stepped forward and rested a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "She knows," she said softly. "She's proud of them. And of you." Thomas nodded, his throat too tight for words. He looked at Rex, then at the three little lives playing in the sun, and smiled through the ache in his chest. The wind shifted, carrying with it the sound of rustling leaves, the soft laughter of children, and the faint clinking of Rex's old tag hanging from the oak branch. It chimed once, clear and bright, like a blessing. And beneath that great tree, in the same yard where fear had once lived, life danced again. Awkward, joyful, unstoppable. For the first time since the storm, the farm felt whole. And as the villagers stood by the fence, watching the miracle unfold before them, even the hardest hearts understood. Some stories aren't about survival alone. They're about the way love turns loss into light. The afternoon sun hung low over Valley Creek, bathing the farm in a honeyed light that turned every blade of grass into gold. A soft breeze rustled through the oak leaves, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and wildflowers. It was a quiet day, the kind of peace that only comes after storms have long passed. Emily Carter's truck rumbled down the gravel road and came to a slow stop by the old Miller farmhouse. She stepped out, boots crunching against the dust, her gaze falling on the wide expanse of pasture ahead. It looked nothing like the place she had first visited, the night it all began. The clinic's sterile lights, the thunder, the tears, all of it seemed like a memory from another life. Now, the only sound was laughter. Across the field, Thomas Miller knelt near the barn, his voice carrying with easy authority. "Sit," he commanded gently, his hand raised. A young German shepherd pup, tall, strong, eyes sharp and alert, obeyed instantly, its tail wagging in anticipation. Emily smiled as she walked closer, arms crossed loosely. "Well," she called, "looks like you've got yourself a prodigy." Thomas looked up, his weathered face creasing into a grin. "Takes after her mama," he said proudly. "This one's Valor. Can't get her to sit still unless she's working. Reminds me of someone." Her eyes followed his gaze to the oak tree at the edge of the yard. Beneath its sprawling branches lay Rex, resting in the grass. The years, and the storm, had taken their toll, but her spirit still burned bright behind her amber eyes. She lifted her head slightly when she saw Emily approach, her tail thumping once, slow but steady. Emily crouched beside her, brushing her fingers through the dog's coarse fur. "Hey, old girl," she whispered softly. "You've done well." Rex gave a small, contented sigh, eyes fluttering closed for a moment, before opening again. It was as if she understood every word. Thomas walked over, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Doc," he said quietly, "I didn't think she'd see another summer." Emily smiled faintly. "Neither did I. But she's got a way of proving people wrong, doesn't she, Tuhishta?" He chuckled, the sound warm but tinged with something deeper, a kind of reverence. That she does. Always had more fight in her than most men I know. They both fell silent, watching as the younger pups, Hope and Faith, wrestled near the fence line. The golden light caught their fur, making them look almost ethereal, as if sunlight itself had learned to run. "It's funny," Emily said after a moment, her tone thoughtful. "I came here thinking I'd just be treating a sick dog. But this place, this family, it changed something in me." Thomas turned to her. "You're not the only one." He glanced down at Rex, his voice softening. "When my wife passed, I thought I was done. The farm felt too quiet, too big for one man. Then Rex came along, loud, stubborn, full of fire. She pulled me back into life." Emily's gaze lingered on him, the admiration unspoken but clear. "And you gave her the same in return." He looked out over the field, his eyes misting slightly. "Maybe. But truth is, I think she gave me more." A moment passed, still and sacred. The only sound was the rustle of grass and the far-off chirp of a meadowlark. Then Valor barked sharply, breaking the quiet. She had caught sight of a butterfly and darted after it with determined clumsiness, her paws kicking up dust as she leapt and stumbled and tried again. Thomas laughed, shaking his head. "Determined little thing," Emily said, smiling. "Looks like the old girl passed on her courage." Thomas glanced back at Rex. "Yeah," he murmured, "and her heart, too." Rex shifted slightly, her gaze following the pups as they played. Her breathing was slower now, but there was peace in her stillness. The peace of a life that had given everything it had to give. Emily knelt beside her again, placing a gentle hand on the old shepherd's head. "She's tired," she said softly, "but she's happy." Thomas nodded. "She's earned her rest." He knelt down beside Rex, his knees pressing into the grass, his rough hand finding the top of her head. For a long moment he said nothing. The air seemed to still around them, even the wind holding its breath. Then, his voice came, low and trembling, like a prayer. "You've done your duty, girl," he whispered. "You can rest now." Rex's tail wagged faintly, one last time, brushing the ground. Her eyes closed, her breathing steady, her body relaxed completely. Emily felt her throat tighten, tears threatening to spill. She reached out, touching Thomas's arm, but he didn't move. His gaze stayed on Rex, his expression a mixture of sorrow and pride, the kind of love that outlives everything else. After a long silence, he exhaled, his voice breaking the hush. "She saved me," he said quietly. "From fire, from loneliness, from myself, and even now, she's still saving me." Emily's eyes shimmered as she stood, looking out over the open field. The puppies were still running, tumbling, barking, chasing the sunlight that glinted off their fur like fire. The world, she realized, hadn't stopped. It had simply begun again. Thomas rose slowly, wiping a hand across his face. "Come on," he said, voice rough but calm. "She'd want us to keep moving." Emily nodded, her smile small but full of light. "She'd want you to train the next generation." Thomas chuckled softly, turning toward the pups. "Guess I better start with teaching them not to chew my boots." They both laughed, not loudly, but in that quiet, healing way laughter sounds after too much sorrow. The air was filled with the sound of life again. Paws on grass, the flutter of wings, the echo of joy. Emily lingered for a moment, watching as Thomas called to the pups. Valor bounded forward immediately, sitting at his feet, her ears perked, her eyes bright with focus. The others followed, clumsy but eager, tails wagging in unison. Thomas raised his hand, a familiar command. "Sit," he said. And they did. All three of them. Perfectly still, perfectly attentive. Emily felt her chest tighten. She looked once more toward the oak tree, where Rex lay peacefully in the fading light. The wind brushed through her fur, and for a fleeting second, it almost looked like she smiled. The sun dipped lower, bathing the field in molten gold. The camera, or the heart, would pull back then. Thomas standing tall, the pups circling him, the horizon stretching wide and endless beyond. The dogs broke into motion, chasing each other through the field, their laughter rising like music. And as the scene faded into the warm glow of evening, one final line whispered through the wind, soft and eternal, and from the night of storms, life found its voice again. Sometimes, stories like Rex's remind us of something we forget in the rush of life, that love doesn't always speak our language. Sometimes, it looks at us through brown eyes, wags its tail, and waits patiently at the door, no matter how long we've been gone. German Shepherds, especially, carry that kind of loyalty. Quiet, unshakable, and pure. They don't ask for much in return. Just our time, our care, and the simple promise that we'll stand by them the way they've always stood by us. If you've ever wanted to understand your own dog a little better, or just find new ways to bring more joy into their days, there's a wonderful resource I often share with friends who love their dogs like family. You can take a look if it feels right for you. It's not about buying anything, just about deepening that bond that already lives between you and your best friend. Because at the end of the day, the greatest gift we can give our dogs is what they've given us all along: unconditional love.